I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Hello, and welcome back to Seamwork Radio. Today, we are talking about the idea of semi-minimalism. So we're going to cover which ideas from the minimalist movement really resonate with us and which don't, and how the aesthetic of minimalism often gets confused with the ideas behind it. We'll also talk about how we think about our stuff, our money, and our time, and how you can adapt some semi-minimalist practices into your sewing. So I want to start us off with one of our icebreakers for makers today. Haley, how much clothing do you own? Is it a lot or a little or in between?
I think I would say kind of like a moderate amount. I think I'm in the in-between. I think most people who see my closet are shocked maybe that I don't have more clothes just because of being sewing, being my core hobby and being like in the fashion world. But I have kind of a moderate amount, but honestly, like I could seriously do with probably like 25% of what is in my actual closet. That's probably the percentage that I actually wear regularly. What about you?
I feel like I have a lot of clothes, and I don't know if that's objectively true. Maybe it's because I seem to mention this in every episode, but because I've just moved, I'm very aware of how much I have and how much gets used.
Mm-hmm.
And I do use quite a bit of my wardrobe, but when you have a fair amount of clothing, you can't wear all of it all the time. So I feel like there are definitely things that I wear a lot more often than other things. And so I feel like it's a lot. And I definitely, like you, feel like I could do with less and probably not even notice a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting to think about how much you really need and how much you really get use out of versus how much you own just because it's hard to part with, which I think is why I have some of the stuff that I have.
Yeah, definitely.
It's definitely been on my mind a lot. The idea of paring down, and also because, as I mentioned, my lifestyle is quite different in this new home because I've moved out to the country. So I was looking through, maybe I mentioned this on another episode, but as I was packing up my stuff, I have this pair of white boots that I bought, and like I don't know that I will be wearing those white boots now that I live in a very rural place. So just thinking about life changes and how much I really need and how to adjust your stuff to your life as things change over time has been very interesting in the last couple months. So I'm curious from the people who listen, your take on it, because as sewers, I think maybe some of us do feel like we have a lot of clothing and maybe others feel like we don't. So I'm really curious from other sewers if you feel like you have a lot of clothing. So you can let us know. You can post on social media and tag it Icebreakers for Makers and answer this question about how much clothing you own and whether you think it's a lot or a little or in between, and let us know. I feel like some of the ideas behind minimalism do resonate with me.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there are some that feel very powerful to me and give you a new lens for looking at your stuff and looking at the world. But I also feel like there are some downsides to minimalism. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, the upsides and the downsides to minimalism as a practice and as a lifestyle. So I think one of the things that I've noticed is that often the focus is really put on the aesthetic of minimalism and not on the ideas or the ethos behind it. And so it's all about a certain look. And that can be off-putting to some people if that look is not what appeals to you or not what brings you joy. So what do you think about that, Haley? Is that something that you've struggled with or you've noticed?
Yeah, I have noticed. And I feel like it's when I see people online, when I'm reading about minimalism, that there is a certain aesthetic that's very heavily like associated with the ethos of minimalism. And the ethos is what appeals to me. The aesthetic is not like my cup of tea so much. So kind of like separating out those two things in my mind, I think has helped me embrace minimalism in parts of my life a little bit more.
Hmm. I think it's interesting because I think there's a reason that the aesthetic and the ethos go together. Because when you have that minimalist aesthetic, it's much easier to have less clothing, for example, in your life. If
Hmm.
everything you own is similar colors, everything is neutral, everything goes together really well, it's very easy to mix and match. So with that sort of aesthetic, which is in my mind what I think of as kind of the popular minimalist aesthetic right now in this moment, is very loose stuff, very flowy stuff, sort of an Eileen Fisher kind of look, maybe
Hmm.
lots of black, lots of neutral colors, lots of linen, and I think it's beautiful. I think it looks absolutely lovely, and there are aspects of that aesthetic that I do really, really love.
Hmm.
So I'm not dissing it by any means because I think it's lovely. But I understand that for some people, it might not just be their look. And so that can turn you off the idea of minimalism altogether if you think, well, that just means like dressing in this particular way. I don't think it's just clothing either. I think it's true in other aspects of our lives, like architecture and other things where the minimalist aesthetic has become very popular.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, why I like this idea of semi minimalism or like adopting certain tenets and not others is because for me, clothing is like a part of my self expression. It's about play and experimenting. It's also about like a big part of my dressing is that has to do with like my sewing practice. And I like having a bigger palette to play with as like, a creative person and an artist. That is inspirational to me. It doesn't need to be a huge palette, but I like having lots of things in my like, toolbox. And so I think a semi-minimalist approach appeals to me because I think constraints are like really creatively inspiring. So having a refined enough palette that you have to be creative with it, but not having it so small that like it discourages play.
Yeah. I think that's part of it, is that it can feel very restrictive if you're a creative person
Mhm.
to have this single aesthetic. And so being able to incorporate that in ways that make sense for your own personal style, your own personality, you as an individual, I think can be really powerful if you can find a way to kind of find that path in between. So, yeah, I think that's really interesting.
I'm curious, Sari, what tenets of minimalism resonate most with you?
Well, I think the main thing that, and I think this is at the heart of minimalism as a movement and as a lifestyle, which is this idea of having things that you value
Mhm.
and using the things that you have. So, not having a bunch of excess stuff just for the sake of having stuff, and really being very considered in what you bring into your life, I think is something that resonates with me. And that's something that I do incorporate into my sewing. I don't sew tons and tons of stuff just to have it. I don't try and keep up with the latest trends and try and constantly refresh my wardrobe or anything like that. I might have done so when I was younger. So I think part of this is also, the stage of life that I'm in. But
Mhm.
that's something that does really resonate with me. And just not getting into this habit of acquiring stuff as entertainment
Mhm.
or as a crutch for other things in my life that maybe I'm not happy with.
Mhm.
I think that's something that I've dealt with in the past, when maybe your job is not fulfilling or your relationships are not fulfilling or you don't have time to do any of the things that you want to do. You can fall back to kind of, well, buying new stuff does bring me pleasure. And that's a real surefire way to bring some pleasure into my life, is to buy a new lipstick or a new nail polish or
Mhm.
a new pair of jeans or whatever it is. And I think we all have that from time to time. And I found that in the past, I have found there are times when I've done that. And I don't know that it's the healthiest way of dealing with some of the other stuff that's going on in your life. There's a book that I read, and I think I have mentioned this on a previous podcast. There's a book that I read many years ago called Your Money or Your Life that I would really recommend. It's not really about minimalism, but it's about this idea of time and money being things that you trade off in life. And the more you spend, the more you focus on acquiring stuff and keeping up with the Joneses and all that stuff, the more time you're giving away because you have to work for that money that you're spending. And so just being honest with yourself about what those trade-offs are and being really intentional about the trade-offs that you want to make in your life. And I think that's where minimalism can come in, because if you can really be intentional about how much you need and think through it instead of being mindless about it, then I think you can make better decisions for yourself as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the part of minimalism that does really resonate with me, is the intentionality behind it. What about you, Haley?
Yeah, I think that I agree with all of what you said. For me, the main thing is being intentional about what I make and what I acquire, and it's not just shopping, also just making things just to make things, or like everybody else is making this new pattern, so I feel like I have to make it. Making things that I know that are going to be useful to me, that are going to be enriching and joyful for me to sew, that I'm going to get like wear often. That's something that really appeals to me about minimalism. And I mean, I don't think like having like a reasonably big wardrobe is necessarily a waste, especially if you wear those things.
Yeah.
I think another thing that's really important to me is not feeling weighed down by my belongings. It's funny. My mom always like calls me a minimalist, which I'm like, it really like, I would not tell anyone that I'm a minimalist. I definitely like some of the ideas behind it, but she, whenever she like comes and visits, she's like, oh, you just like, she thinks I don't have very many clothes, or my kitchen is like, I wouldn't call it sparse. I mean, like I have an ice cream maker, but I don't have like a lot of like single use things in my life. I like things that I'm going to use regularly, or like I don't want them. But she's always like, oh, you're such a minimalist. But I just don't like having a bunch of like shit. I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
It stresses me out, and it's like visual clutter, and it makes me feel icky.
Yeah. I think the visual clutter is something that really affects me as well. In our last house, since we just moved, our last house was, as I've mentioned, was really small, and I didn't have places to put a lot of things. And so there was a lot more clutter than there is in our current house as we're starting to unpack and actually have like drawers to put things in. So I didn't realize how much that affected me. I feel like that really mentally was kind of taxing to see all this clutter and always have to deal with all these like cluttered surfaces and things. So I think that's something that has really come to light for me lately when it comes to this stuff. I do want to say that I think minimalism is very popular right now and has been for the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so. I have been thinking about why that is. And I think any aesthetic that comes into popularity, there are cultural reasons for it, and it reflects certain cultural values that we have. And I think right now, life has been getting very chaotic, and there's a lot of information overload. There's a lot of busyness in people's lives. There's a lot of feeling like you're not doing enough. And we've been talking about this on the last few episodes. I think that minimalism offers sort of an antidote to that, both on an aesthetic level and on an values level. And I think that is very appealing to people. I don't know that it necessarily is the only answer. I can see why it has become popular. And I think it's interesting that there are these currents in our culture that are so diametrically opposed, that there's this current of information overload and craziness in the world. And then there's this current of, well, you need to throw out all your belongings and just live the simplest life possible. And I just wonder if there is a middle path that brings some of the benefits of that calmness, that slowness, that intentionality, without being quite so extreme as some of the more extreme cases of minimalism. I know not everybody who considers himself a minimalist is extreme. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I always like a path of moderation. So this kind of idea of being semi-minimalist really appeals to me.
Yeah, me too. I think that's the right term for me right now. So I wanted to share some tips that I think might help if you're interested in becoming maybe more of a little bit more of a minimalist, but you're not really a minimalist, especially as a creative person. I think that might be a term that not everybody can really get into. So I think the first tip that I would have is to really think about what your personal style is and plan out your sewing a little bit more if you want to be a little bit more intentional about what you bring into your life. And I think just having a personal style and understanding why certain things appeal to you can really help you to make clear decisions about the things that you own and the things that you make. So that's one thing that I would really recommend. We have the Design Your Wardrobe program. Obviously, we mention it all the time. It is a really awesome way to do this with a group of people. You can learn more about that at seamwork.com if you want. We just wrapped up a session. We do it twice a year, and we also have a self-guided version for our members. So you can check it out. It's at seamwork.com/wardrobe, but we'll put a link in the show notes as well. So that's one thing, is just getting real clear with yourself on your own style. And then the second one, this is one that really comes from my own life right now, which is to clean out your closets regularly. And I think that as an exercise, it really reframes what you own and what you want to bring into your life each time you do it. So having a regular schedule, maybe a spring cleaning and a fall cleaning, something like that, or maybe you do it more often. I like to have a little basket next to my closet where I can throw things all the time as well, things I want to donate. If I notice something in my closet that I'm really not using. So cleaning out your closets can really help you to think about what you're using, what you're not using, what you're wearing, what life changes you've had that make things less useful for you, where the value is in the things that you make and the things that you own. Part of that, you could even keep track of stuff that you get rid of a lot. So if you notice that there are certain types of things that you seem to always be throwing away and always acquiring, maybe that's a signal to you that those are not things that really fit your life, even though you like them. I think it's the hardest part. When there are things that you like, but really don't fit your life, that's the hardest part for me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot of that. And then define how much you need. That's another really good way to start thinking about how much you really want to have in your life. And when I say define how much you need or how many you need, I'm thinking individual types of items. So like pairs of jeans or t-shirts, things like that. Like how many, for me personally, like how many white tank tops do I need to own? I have so many. I probably have 5 white tank tops. Do I need 5 white tank tops? Probably not. Although, as I mentioned in another episode, they do tend to get yellow in the armpit. So maybe it's good to have one backup. But just thinking about, for me, I love jeans. I wear a lot of jeans. I probably have, 6 or 7 pairs of jeans right now. And, they're all different. They're different styles and things. But I think it's good to think about whether maybe you do have 2 that are pretty similar, and do you really need them? Do you really wear them? So just thinking about in terms of those discrete types of items can be really, really helpful for you and can help you to be more intentional with what you own. So that was tip 3. And then the next one is, this is something that can be helpful for some people, is creating a uniform or 2. Not everybody likes to have a uniform, but I think it can be really helpful, even if it's something that you veer away from sometimes, to have certain kind of preset, like outfit templates that you can use to fill in the gaps in your wardrobe and really think about what you're actually going to wear on a day-to-day basis. If you're interested in this, you could check out one of our most popular episodes is the Rule of 3 episode, where we talk about one particular technique that Haley shares for doing this for creating these kind of outfit templates. So you might want to check that out. But I think just having a uniform that you feel comfortable in, that really feels like you, that matches your personal style, it just makes it so much simpler and really makes sewing things that you'll actually get use out of and actually wear a lot simpler if you know what that is. And Design Your Wardrobe actually can help you with that too. We do a process of creating kind of outfit templates that you then use to create your collection. So that's another thing you can try out. And then thinking more long term about what you make. A few weeks ago, we had the episode where I talked about the decade project that I'm doing, thinking about what I want to have for the next 10 years of my life. And thinking about that has really been transformative for me, and thinking about what I want to sew and how I can make things that are more lasting and that are going to fit with my lifestyle and with who I am for the next 10 years of my life instead of just the next 6 months of my life, which is typically how I've been thinking about my sewing, honestly, which is, what do I want to wear now? What do I want to wear this fall? That's how I would normally think about it, instead of what I want to wear for the next 10 falls of my life. So thinking about your long-term sewing plans can really, really help you to create a wardrobe that is more functional for you and that is more valuable for you. And then our next tip is to buy fabric for specific projects. And I don't know about you, Haley, but I just love buying fabric.
Yeah. It's like its own hobby.
I've gotten better, but when it comes to minimalism, there's the minimalism of what you actually sew and what you actually have in your wardrobe, but there's also the aspect of acquiring fabric, which I think can also be kind of a shopping addiction for a lot of people. Oh, it's so hard to resist. It's like there's so much possibility in fabric.
And I feel like there's this like scarcity like mindset when it comes to fabric. Like, I'm never going to find this again. I don't feel like I encounter it with, maybe it's just like clothes that are in like, within my reach. I don't feel like, oh, I'm never going to be able to find that pair of jeans again.
Yeah.
But with fabric, I feel that way. So I love the idea of like really I do try to my very best to only buy fabric when I know specifically what I want to make for it. Because I have so much fabric I did not do that with. It sits around in my house and I don't use it. I should.
I know. I do try to do this more, but what I noticed in packing up all my fabric when I moved is that I have a lot of fabric that I bought when I went on trips, because I will buy it as a souvenir. So I have like fabric that I bought when I was in Japan or Australia or even in LA, and it's beautiful stuff, but I don't have a purpose for it. So it's just, and I can't get rid of it because it has so many memories attached to it. So it just kind of sits around. So I think that is something, it's kind of another tip, is to alternate buying new fabric with using something that you already have. So you could set a process for yourself around this, where maybe you can buy some new fabric for a specific project you want to make, but then the next project you make, you pull something out of your stash and find a creative use for it. That's something that I would really like to have more process around, because I think that could be a really fun and creative way to use up more of the beautiful stuff that I already have instead of buying more. So those are some tips for your fabric. And then a couple more kind of related tips. So we have a lot of tips today that are, again, more about your wardrobe, which is, you could think about replacing things instead of just continually adding to your wardrobe. That could be another way of reframing what you have. So if you have certain types of items that you really like to wear, then maybe you want to think about, when they wear out, how could you replace this with something new instead of just continually adding the latest thing into your life. And then repairing what you have is kind of another way of extending the life of what you already own, so that you don't have to continually replace stuff. So that's something that I can struggle with sometimes, because I don't like doing repairs and alterations all that much. I find it kind of boring in comparison to making something new. So that's something that I would like to get better at. And I think with certain types of clothing, it makes more sense. Like if you're making things that are more long lasting, that are meant to be long lasting, and that are meant to stand the test of time, then part of that is that they're easier to repair and that you can fix them and continually breathe new life into them instead of throwing them away when they get old. So that's another thing I'm thinking about in terms of this decade project that I'm working on, and what are things that can last and will be easy to repair and continue to use in the coming years. So that was a lot of tips, a lot of tips for this one. It's something that I've definitely thought about quite a bit.
That's okay, because we're going to just go in and like recap all 9 of those tips while they're fresh. So tip number 1 is to define your personal style. If you have a defined personal style, then you can make things with more intention. Also, cleaning out your closet more regularly and just keeping track of like, what are the types of things you get rid of the most? Are you getting rid of a lot of like fancy dresses? Maybe it's time to stop adding them to your wardrobe with such frequency. Tip number 3 is to define how many you need and get specific here. How many pairs of jeans do you really need? How many white tank tops do you need? If you're Sari, think hard about this, because you might find you have a lot of redundancy in your wardrobe. Creating a uniform or a couple uniforms, I like to think of them as outfit formulas, can be really helpful. For me, I wear like a lot of like crop tops and high-waisted things. And so I know lots of times that if I make a crop top or like a high-waisted pair of pants or a skirt, I probably will wear it a bunch. Think about the long term. Get inspired by Sari's decade project and think about what you want to wear for the next 10 falls and not just this fall. Keep in mind your fabric as well. Buying fabric for specific projects or alternating buying fabric with using up fabric you have can be really useful to reduce waste and redundancies, not just in your closet, but also in your fabric stash, because it's a whole other part of sewing. And then the last 2 are to replace instead of add to your closet and repair what you have instead of just acquiring more and more and more and more. So those are our hot tips for the day, 9 of them all together. And if this is something you want to learn more about, we have some recommendations for you. We have a couple podcast episodes that might be of interest. The first being Creative Mending, where Sari and I talk all about some like cool ideas for mending your clothing and just have like an all-around great conversation about mending. Also check out the Rule of 3, where we talk about this really cool kind of system for wardrobe planning and keeping a kind of a nice consistent thread running throughout your wardrobe. Of course, like every episode, we recommend Design Your Wardrobe to help you define your style and your sewing plans so that you're sewing with purpose. And our sewing planner goes really hand in hand with that and can help you create that defined plan. And then we have a whole category of wardrobe building articles in the magazine. We're going to link that in the show notes so that you can check that out. There's like, I might be exaggerating, but I'm pretty sure there's like dozens of articles that you can read about wardrobe building there to kind of get your creative juices flowing. And then lastly, the book that Sari recommended, Sari's weekly book recommendation, Your Money, Your Life. And that's by Vicki Robin, if you are interested in reading that. So yeah, we covered a lot of ground and have an equally large amount of recommendations to follow up all of our tips. But if you liked this episode and you liked this topic, be sure to leave us a review. We really do truly love reading them, and it helps us to get inspired for more episodes. If you have something that you want to hear us talk about, definitely let us know there. We'll shout you out in the episode if we end up running with that idea. So be sure to leave us a review. It means really the world to us.
Yeah, we love it. Thank you so much. Well, we'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Have a great rest of your week. Bye. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.